Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Biology in the Basement with your host, Mr. Andraco. It is Dress Your Best Day for Spirit Week, so I wore one of my nicer outfits. Believe it or not, I do have nice clothes. I know that you guys always make fun of me being in t-shirts and no tie ever, but I do have nice clothes. Being a musician, I am supposed to dress up. And I do have, a large family that has constant events that I must be in attendance of. So this is my normal, I'm dressing to look nice outfit. So since it's Dress Your Best Day in Spirit Week, I figured I would participate. And even right over here, we can give it up to Bonesy for also being a part of this. Little secret. Bonesy doesn't have any muscles, so I had to dress him. And let me tell you, this was one of the most difficult things I had to do today, was putting buttons and sleeves. He's not an easy guy to dress. He does not get along very well, but it really worked out pretty good, I think, if you ask me. Yeah, Bonesy's looking hot, so We'll give it up to him, yes. Okay, so the purpose of this video is to go over the synapse, where two neurons meet, right? Nerve cells, neurons, where they meet. And we will also talk about the five senses. So those are the two big things that this video is going to cover. So, we got to have a fact of the day so that we can get started. And that has to do with another pandemic that took place and a good thing that came out of it. Candyland was invented by a woman during the polio pandemic. The woman, Eleanor Abbott, was recovering in the hospital. She created the game to entertain the children in her hospital wing as they were left by family members for long periods of time to recover. Right, of course, you still got to pay the bills. You can't just sit by your child's side, unfortunately, during a pandemic. So this woman, Eleanor, we salute you for giving us Candyland. We're playing a new version called Dino Baby Rescue at our house because it's less competitive. It's more of a teamwork game. I don't know if you know what it's like to have two young boys in your house. Some of you have brothers or sisters and things like that, and you can relate to two boys in the house. They get very competitive. So Dino Baby Rescue was a good alternative where it's kind of like Candyland, but they work together, sort of. Okay, so here we go. Nervous system, right? This is the network of nerves that run through your body, communicating messages from your brain, your spinal cord, known as the central nervous system, to all parts of the body. This is how cells communicate with each other. Now, this is done through a very simple process, whether you are a single-celled organism or a 70-trillion-celled organism. It's all about stimulus and response, right? If you remember, a little review, all living things respond to stimuli. So it is as basic as something that a living thing does. Of course, we'll see today when we talk about the senses that our ability to receive stimuli is much more complex than some of these other simple ones, right? Where when we did our spreadsheets, we saw that, what is the sensory organs of the amoeba and the protists and the bacteria, and it was just their cell membrane can detect certain chemicals, and that's it. Okay, so we're going to go over how complex we are, but this is a very basic concept: stimulus, response, cause and effect, right? And we have receptors to receive those stimuli, and we have effectors to respond to that stimuli. Usually our muscles, but I also talked about integration, where your body's just like, noted, that information goes in your brain. It's all focused around the nerve cell called the neuron. Remember, it's still a nerve, or it's still a cell, but it has a wire running through it. That wire is called an axon, and hopefully your homework went over all of the different terms related to this specialized cell. Then we talked about the impulse. The impulse is the message. Okay, that is the little message that's going pew, pew, pew all around your body. Okay, now depending where it's going to and from, it will travel through different types of neurons. If it's coming from a sense organ back to your brain or the spinal cord, it will look something like this, but it still has a cell body with a nucleus and all its cell parts, right? Motor neurons are sending messages to your muscles to respond. And so it is set up this way where it's attached to a muscle fiber. Usually we have the discussion about the cell body of the interneuron and how it looks very weird. And then we also discuss how it has no myelin sheath. Well, that's because it's protected by your spinal cord and cerebral spinal fluid. So no need for that fancy lipid. And here's where we stopped yesterday, right? Just going with all the information coming into the central nervous system. But before we go any further, we have to talk about a few other terms, because these nerves cannot run the whole length of your body. These neurons can't go from the tip of your toe all the way to your brain, right? There are breaks, and this is where I compare and contrast your body to the electrical system of, say, this basement, right, where we have switches and we have wires and things like that. And our body has the same thing, where it's sending impulses and they're traveling through wires. But if you had a break in a wire, if I was to cut any of these wires and there was a break, then there would be no current traveling through that wire. But since your body can't run a neuron from the tip of your toe to your brain, what it does is it does it in segments. And so in those segments there are gaps. Those gaps are called synapses. A synapse is simply just a gap between two nerve cells. Okay? But they're still able to maintain the flow of that impulse over that gap. How do they do that? They do that with these simple molecules called neurotransmitters. They are sitting here waiting, and they jump the gap, and they keep that message going. It's crazy to think that this is all happening within a millisecond. You know, when you prick your finger, it makes it all the way to your brain within a millisecond, even though it traveled through a few nerves to get there. So these neurotransmitters are helping to jump those gaps in between each one of those nerves that are required to carry that message back to your brain. So there is that. We could talk about threshold later. As you can see, here's just a different diagram. Notice there are mitochondria, and the plural is mitochondrion, but they are there to power this process, right? The mitochondria provides ATP, and so ATP is required to push those neurotransmitters across the synapse to the next neuron or into your brain. All right, so this is where things get confusing, but also hopefully will make much more sense. I start this lecture by saying, what are your five senses? Like we're in, first grade, and everybody's like touch and taste and smell and sight and hearing, right? And so then I say, well, we also have 5 receptors. But the weird thing is they don't match up. We don't have a smell receptor, a taste receptor, a vision receptor. And we actually have different types of receptors, but they don't match up with our 5 senses, but they do contribute. So I've kind of broken it down as these are your main receptors of the body, and these are the senses they contribute to. So we've got pain receptors, obviously contribute to touch. We have thermoreceptors detecting heat and cold, which also contribute to touch. Mechanoreceptors, which are receptors that deal with pressure. And so they can help with touch, obviously, but also with sound, as sound are vibrations. And if they can detect those, the pressure of those vibrations, it can be converted into sound. And we'll talk about that in a second. Taste and smell is just your ability to detect chemicals. And so we have all different types of chemoreceptors. That's how that's pronounced, chemoreceptors, not chemoreceptors, just like chemotherapy. These are chemoreceptors that receive certain chemicals, whether they are olfactory in your nose or gustatory on your tongue. They detect chemicals. And then you may have heard of rods and cones. Rods and cones in the back of your eye are the photoreceptors that give us our ability to see. So I'll go through these very quickly, and then we'll get you your homework and get you out of here. So first one here is a chemoreceptor. This one is your taste bud. It's pretty cool how it works. You have different ones. I think there's a oh no, that was the old textbook. But they show your tongue and how you have different ones, right? Like on the tip of your tongue as opposed to the sides of your tongue. We used to do a quick lab where we did sweet and sour things. You know, when you taste a Sour Patch Kid, it makes certain parts of your tongue feel different as opposed to when you eat, you know, a really salty, those pretzels. I used to love to eat those really salty pretzels. That affects a different part of your tongue, right? And you actually have different types of chemoreceptors or taste buds for different types of chemicals just in taste. You also have chemoreceptors that line your sinuses, right? When you smell something, you can see here there are little breaks in your skull where it looks kind of weird. You know, these little hair-like cilia projections come down, and they detect those chemicals and send them right up into the brain so that you can smell and receive and process that information very quickly. I don't know if you know this, but this is one of our most valuable senses, is our sense of smell and detecting chemicals. A lot of it is down in the base of our brain where we're processing these chemicals, but they are very important. I won't go on a long digression. I'm sure if we had my regular students in front of me, we'd be talking about pheromones and all the other chemical communications that go on, but we're going to leave that for another time. But anyways, we have chemoreceptors that give us different senses of smell. The eye. The eye is a super cool organ, right? It is the most complex, debatable of all the organs of our body. And it develops first, as we showed in homologous development, embryological similarities, where the eyeball and the spine develop first because they're really, or spinal cord, I should say, develop first because they are the most complex structures. Now, here's something that may blow your mind, but your pupil is technically just a hole. Yeah, just a hole. It is covered, of course, by your cornea, but the actual pupil itself is just a hole. Okay, yes, there is a membrane over it, and yes, there is a lens right behind it, but technically it's an opening. And the iris is another smooth muscle that opens and closes, okay, and regulates the amount of light entering the eye, right? The cornea is the protector, the lens is the focuser, and then the screen where we project is back here. And so we can look at this section of the eye as like a projector screen where all of your photoreceptors are located that receive that stimuli coming through the pupil and process it into what we see. What's cool about this is the lens, personally. the lens itself is not a solid object, right? If we had to have a solid lens, we would need multiple lenses to see near and far and real far and really, really close. But we actually just have these cool muscles that flex the shape of our lens so that we can focus in on different things. And so, right, when it's short and fat, it helps us to like magnify things, as to when it is really long, we can see longer distances. It is super cool how our eyes work, but I don't want to go on too far. All right, here we are in our ability to hear things. Of course, we have the ear. The ear is very important. The size of the ear is dependent on its need for survival as far as finding prey or listening out for predators, right? And they can turn their ears in different directions. But the ear itself works very well as a funnel of sound into your ear canal. Normally what I do in this part of the lecture is I have you put your hands like this, and then I have you put your hands like this while I'm talking, and it's amazing how much more sound your ears can collect than if you just go like this, right? And then when you're doing this, you're actually listening to the sound, bouncing off the wall, and then you're catching it. So it's a pretty interesting little ability that our ears give us, though relatively small in us. Maybe we should do more listening. Anyways, the sound gets channeled through the ear canal. It bounces off your tympanum or eardrum, and it moves a series of bones. Little trivial fact here: the smallest bones of the body are found in your ear. They are the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. And the stirrup pushes against what's called the oval window right here, and it puts pressure inside of your cochlea. Your cochlea takes that pressure and has these cilia inside of this cochlea, and when they start to vibrate, the mechanoreceptors turn those vibrations into sound, and they send it to an auditory nerve, right? This is one of your sensory nerves, right? These are the sensory neurons that are sending impulses from the sense organ to the brain, just like when you look at the optical nerve, right? That is a sensory neuron taking information from the sense organ back to the brain. We've also got right here, these are your sensory neurons taking the information from the sense organ to your brain. Each one of them has that sensory neuron. That's where they would be found. And so then we're going to start to talk about the brain next time. But let me give you your homework. Hopefully you kind of understood that part. But then we're going to talk about the senses, right? So your homework will cover H193 to H195, okay? So I would like you guys to enjoy your formal Tuesday, and have a good day, everybody. And Draco, out.